Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Artcasters number 424. And we have a returning guest who hasn't been on the show in a while and a lot of life changes and things. So we're glad to have him back on, and we will get to him in a minute and start catching up. But before we do that, we'll do what we always do and work our way around the virtual room and introduce ourselves and talk about any projects we got going on or anything we want to promote. So as far as me, you're on my channel. So that's where you can find Artcasters when it's my turn to host. But also you can find my latest videos where I am taking nostalgia like from the Gen X era. I'm kind of figuring out how it works, recreating it. So my last video that I did, I took Fun Dip and I made Sad Dip with gross flavors. So if that sounds fun to you, I've got I've done like Underoos, I've done wax pack trading cards, all that stuff. So if you're into that, definitely check out what I'm doing. Also, I've got a website, circworks.com. You can go and check that out. I have some of those aforementioned wax packs up there, as well as my comic book Young and the Dead. And so that's what I got to talk about. What about you, Josh?
Awesome. Yeah. So I am currently about 8 songs into a new album that's going to be called, I think, probably Modern Monsters or Modern Horror. I'm not sure yet which I'm going to title it. But if you want to hear the first 2 albums, They Don't Care About the Born and Worst Places to Work are like 2 albums that are out, and they're streaming everywhere of rock and roll music that the kids like. And then aside from that, we have Jacob's Apartment and 2 Stories, which are my 2 graphic novels that are made by a human being and not AI, so you should support it. And then aside from that, I just stream at Joshua Kemble on the YouTubes.
All right, Corey.
Yeah, you can find my stuff at CoreyKerr.com. And if you want to check out the book I'm writing that I am serializing live, you can check it out at CoreyKerr.com/book. I've been putting some stuff out on YouTube as well. So I've got my my new studio layout that was kind of forced upon me by my kid breaking into my studio and pulling the bookshelves off the wall. And the new one's better. So yeah, but he also recently took some weather stripping and made a crown out of it, so we had to shave his head. So yeah, he's giving us a run for our money. Yeah, if you want to watch the studio tour, you can see that. But the book just released a chapter about that kind of questions: is it possible to do art if you don't have any hope of success? So there's kind of a bit of an existential kind of exploration in that chapter. So
Yeah, I would highly recommend both those videos. One is a horror tale for artists, every artist's worst fear, and also in the room tour, he also kind of gives you behind the scenes of some of his original art that he's collected from some artists you may be familiar with. So
yeah, I actually just won. I just participated in my first Heritage auction, and I won a piece
cool.
that I'm excited about. So yeah. Anyway.
Oh, awesome.
Lovely.
All right, so now it's on to Gerimi. Gerimi, it's been a while, but we're glad to have you back. What's going on in your world? I mean, as far as things you got to promote, we'll go a little deeper after that.
Well, as far as promoting, I as well am a live streamer, and I stream my art process on YouTube and also restream it on Twitch and Facebook weekly on Sundays, 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. Generally speaking, I show my creative process creating, writing, drawing, pencil inking comics, although over the past couple of years, I've been doing more illustration, figure drawing, study type work, because moving on to my next project has had quite a few challenges, which is kind of the theme of what we're talking about tonight. But other than that, I also have my first graphic novels available on my store, Gerimi.net. It's Eye of the Gods, psychological thriller about a man cursed with visions he cannot control. I have my most recent project, which I completed after a very, very long, I think almost decade-long odyssey, Morning Star, which is a retelling of Lucifer's Fall from Heaven as a Western. It's a 8-issue series collected in 2 volumes. So yeah, that's all of my stuff.
All right. So I guess let's just get into it. So it's been a while since we've talked, we kind of caught up briefly before the call, and you had some news that you've already let most of people that are checking into your live stream know about. But so you're a lot of new things going on in your world.
Yes. So I over past couple of months, I left my long-term day job. I'm still working in the same field as a toy designer, but I'm working freelance now. It's a lovely place, and I'm on really good terms with everyone there. So it's not a sad parting. It was a parting which gave me an opportunity to kind of pursue life in greener pastures. My wife and I have been wanting to move out of the LA area for a while now, so now it's given us a chance to move up the coast to a place that's a little bit more rural. Like I can be sitting and drawing or working on design work, and I look outside my studio window, and there'll be deer or turkey. Wow. Turkey, like we have wild turkeys just running around out here. I turned to my wife one day and I said, "What do wild turkeys drink?"
Wild turkey.
She didn't get it.
The punchline would have to be like Jameson, just to, you know what I mean? Just to throw people off.
But yeah, it's been these changes. It's one of those things where getting into a new routine can be very, very challenging when you've been doing something the same way. And this was a thing when we were talking before we started. The thing I was going to say is that I had been at that job for almost 13 years, which is almost unheard of in art jobs.
Yeah.
And it was a wonderful place to work. I worked with wonderful people, worked on tons of great entertainment licensed properties. But that's a reason enough to stay in a position for that long. But one of the main reasons why I was so pleased to have that position is that the stability of a long-term job that isn't a grind. Because most people are like, I hate my day job. I got to get out. Everyone here's a jerk. You know what? I didn't have any of that. It was a wonderful place. But the stability allowed me to turn all of my focus to just making the thing I was passionate about.
Yeah.
Go to the job, do the work, which is fulfilling, come home, spend some family time with the wife and the cats, and then all right, whatever spare time I have left, it's real simple. Write and draw.
Yep.
Work on process, take my figure drawing classes to keep trying to grow my skills. But the benefit of not having to, because every creative goes through periods, and definitely there were periods earlier in my career before this job where I would be in between gigs or just a couple of freelance gigs here and there for months, if not sometimes a year at a time, where I didn't have a full-time day job. We've all gone through that. And having gone through that and knowing how much your focus is distracted and fractured by having to constantly pursue the next gig, pursue the next client, balancing the current work, chasing all of that. It's very mentally draining and difficult to get any work done. And I feel like the ability to even complete these last two books, the 2 volumes of Morningstar, was in big part the stability that day job gave me. So.
Yeah, I mean, and that's pretty, that's, like you said, it's kind of unheard of. I mean, that's 10 years longer than any art job I've ever been at.
But hang on. I have to let my cat out of my office. Okay. She snuck in here and now the door's closed.
So while Jeremy is,
right.
That was quick. I didn't have to really do a segue there. All right. But yeah, so I was just saying, yeah, I mean, that's all the more reason that this is a big transition for you, because I mean, I guess, I don't know. I'm so used to, like, every single art job I was ever at, I went into and I was kind of like you. I mean, pretty much most of the art jobs I've had, I enjoyed, and I enjoyed the people I work with and everything. But after a few of them, every single day I went in, I'm going, well, this could be my last day. And usually with no other, I mean, a lot of times, sometimes there would be signs and everything like, but even if there weren't any, it was like, oh, this could be my last day. And I kind of just went into it with that attitude. So I'm kind of used to things changing and reinventing myself and all that. And I'm doing that now with, kind of what I'm doing on YouTube. but also, you know, much like you, I'm in the middle of wrapping up I'm wrapping up Young and the Dead. The artwork's all done. There's just production stuff that I have to do. But I always said, you know, I don't want to start on another story until at least I have that story complete. I don't care if there's some production stuff to hammer out, but now I'm at the point where I can start thinking about, you know, the next project I'm super stoked about. So I don't know. I mean, that's kind of my story. But as far as you, I mean, same thing. I mean, you've been working on your project as long as I've been working on Young and Dead. You know, what, 10 years? I may have worked on mine a little longer, but not probably as consistent. How many issues was Morningstar again?
Let's see. I want to say that I started it in either 2011 or 2012, and I wrapped it up. I finished drawing the final issue in 2019. I finished it during the pandemic.
Yeah.
And then it took me probably another maybe 8 months to a year before I put together the second trade. And so yeah, it's, you know, not quite a decade, but it was getting close to that. Actually, you know what? I feel like my numbers are off at some point. I think it might have been 2020 when I finished it, because I remember looking at the time and I was like, it's damn near a decade I've been working on this. Yeah. But it's funny that you mentioned not wanting to, until you really had the goal line in sight, not wanting to start thinking about or really developing something new. And the reason why that's funny is because I feel like I screwed myself by doing that. Okay. And here's the thing. I think like most of us, we've got that running list, whether it's in a sketchbook or a Google Doc or a notebook. You know, we've got that list of ideas and maybe the stuff that we kind of write and start kind of developing in the background. And, you know, you're not sitting down and actively writing it, but you're kind of like, oh, plot point here, a character, you know, description there, you know, just kind of slowly building the pieces. Well, I knew going into the final issue of Morningstar that one of the things that was making it take so long was the fact that every time that I finish drawing something and I have to go into writing, I have to spin up my writer brain. You know, I mean, there are cartoonists who literally, it's cartooning, it's storytelling, it's all one brain. There are definitely people like that. I am someone for whom my art brain and my writing brain are completely separate entities. I much in the same way that you might look at a collaborator and a writer and be like, why did you write like a 5-page scene of an army descending with like horses and dirigibles and elephants? But I'll write that kind of stuff knowing full well that my artist brain's going to turn around later. It's like, you know, it just,
we're the worst writer for ourselves. Like, it's funny, like if a client were to, you know, ask me to do half the things I've done for personal projects, it's insane. You know, it's like, I don't know if I want to do like a giant crowd scene. No, you have to.
Yeah. Well, no, I don't. And I mean, I don't go as deep as far as the detail and stuff, but I do write out full scripts. And sometimes I'm like, I don't really need to, because I'm the one drawing this.
But even Scott, you do that too, where like Young and the Dead, you're like, I'm going to have this scene in a crazy arcade. And it's like, wait, why did I pick a crazy arcade? You know,
because it's awesome
and it looks cool. Yeah,
but coloring it, man.
Oh
yeah.
But
even if it's in black and white.
Yep. There you go. But the thing that I realized, I've known for a while now that one of the big changes I've needed to make is to make writing a part of my daily practice. Not writing a whole issue, but just what my intent was to write for 30 minutes a day. Doesn't matter how much I get done or how little I get done. The point is to have the writer brain always spun up, because the art brain, I mean, the fact of the matter is that even if my drawings are coming out horrible, it doesn't upset me, because I know that it's a matter of just rebuilding the muscles with whatever's wrong or just looking up the proper reference. I know how to fix those problems. And I know that if I spend enough time writing, I'll develop that same muscle, but I haven't really developed it because what happens is I work on a project, I write it, and I spend 5 years drawing it, and then I start writing again.
Yeah, that is interesting. Yeah.
So
I've been kidding Corey because he's been doing these writing things and it just like comes off the top of his head. And last episode, it was just, he was like, I'm kind of stuck right now, and he throws out this idea. And then the next week he's got it. It's all written. And he posts it on YouTube. So,
well, I mean,
writing is way easier than drawing for me.
No,
Yeah.
Because like I'll tell you. So I did a bunch of animated shorts, and then I did Shades where it was like partially animated, partially live action. So I spent like 3 months animating the whole thing, and then I just went out one day with my buddies, and I shot the rest of the movie. And it was amazing because I just said, "Hey, walk over there," and they just did. And that's like writing. It's like if there's a crowd scene, with a guy on a horse or whatever, I just write. There's a crowd scene and there's a guy on a horse, and then there is. I don't have to spend all the time figuring out the angles and the anatomy.
But to tell a good story, and not just the concept, but just to be able to weave the words and I mean it's not, I don't think it doesn't come as easy to me as drawing. And saying that, like I said, I mean I've been learning how to draw for 40, 45, 50 years or something. So I mean it's but now that I have those I've worked those muscles, it's easier than I think.
I'm not gonna make the mistake again of saying writing is easy. I said it was easier than drawing.
Although when you mentioned the thing about you just describe a horse and there it is, but then I realized you could have a paragraph, not pages and pages. We can just have 1 or 2 paragraphs of describing the armor the horse is wearing, the greaves, the smell of its.
Oh sure.
It's of the leather, the saddle, and like all those details. I'm like, that's the verbal equivalent of rendering.
Yeah.
And it still goes way quicker than drawing.
Oh, yeah.
When you're talking about the amount of time it would take to draw the detail that you can sit there and say, I'm going to spend 2 paragraphs on the horse. Just describe the horse.
But you can also cheat it a little bit in writing because you can just say, you can just say, it was a 17th century couch. And then I still don't have to know what a 17th century couch looks like.
Yeah.
That's
been the funniest thing about working on a historical fiction book that's written by someone else. Right now we're collaborating, and it's like the script will have things like that where it'll be like,
right.
And, they pick up this object, and I'm like, okay, now I need to know what that object looked like in 1857. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's, and these are historical figures. So it's like, okay, so now we're doing a scene in an opera house. What is that opera house? What did it look like? It's insane how much harder it is. It's funny. Yeah. I relate a lot to what Jeremy's talking about because every graphic novel I've done started with a script that was written in probably at most like maybe a month, maybe 2 months, of like first drafts, like revisions, feedback, second draft, maybe even 4 months at the most, right? And then each one proceeded to be about 5 years to execute, and it's just I don't know how that, but I love the idea of keeping that muscle sharp.
Yeah,
so that it comes more fluidly and naturally.
Now that you guys have said that, I think I just came up with something of why. So you're saying that your artist brain, it's active all the time because you guys have developed that, right? I haven't. I'm very new, like in the last 12 years, right? To like visual, to illustration.
Well, then you're a 12-year-old savant.
Well, no, I don't think. I think it's but I'm not new to anxiety, and that's all I'm doing with writing is I'm just tapping into my fears about things, and then I just write those down in a story form. So it's like I think maybe if you take like a Scott Snyder view of things, where like most of the stuff that he is writing about is like, oh, I'm terrified that I'm going to be a bad father, and then he writes, the Batman Death in the Family, or whatever. Like his stories are always based on something that he's scared about. Yeah, most of that is me. Like I'm
Yeah.
I'm like, what would happen if if this happened? And they're like, yeah, that would be pretty terrifying.
What would happen if the Supreme Court granted you executive privilege? Sorry. Sorry, just thinking of horror scripts.
Yeah, yeah. Mine are a little bit more entertaining, like not so real world. Like, what would happen if with amnesia? Would it actually be like a rom com, or would everybody just be beating each other to death like toddlers with adult strength?
It's so good. It is a good story, but that is interesting. It's funny because I totally know what Jeremy's talking about. Like, I'm really comfortable with writing because I grew up with my mom was like an English teacher, so like I've been a book nerd since like day one, and writing comes very fluidly. But to Jeremy's point, in art, because I have close to like 20 years of experience doing this professionally, and a lot of it being a gun for hire, where it's like you don't have time to be insecure about the thing you're working on. You just kind of get comfortable with being like, okay, I've never drawn this before and we're gonna do it, and figuring it out. And so like Jeremy was saying, like you get used to learning ways to recognize times where you're blocked and how to overcome that, or where you're hitting like a problem and maybe changing an angle or changing your thought process on it or changing up your style, all of that stuff. You do that long enough, like you get real used to like switching, adapting, and being very comfortable with it. Even if it's like stuff that, like there's still to this day things I probably have never drawn, but I wouldn't freak out if I had to draw something I hadn't drawn. Whereas with writing, yeah, I'm way less comfortable with that quick adaptation because it's just not something I've been doing under the gun. I love that idea of the 30 minutes,
Yeah.
So you're doing this to craft your new story, or
Yes.
Nice.
Well, see there. Well, it would be nice were I to have taken my own advice and implemented it. So to dial it back, or to rewind in time a little bit.
Yeah.
While I was working on the final issue of Morningstar, I kept telling myself I need to be writing the next thing so that when I am done with Morningstar, I can just roll into working on the next book. However, because the project was taking me, whatever it was, 8 years, and I was getting close to the end, I just kept thinking about the fact of like the people who've come to conventions in the past and have been sticking with me through the journey and wanting to wrap up the story for them, because I had gone from at the absolute fastest with a day job, I was able to finish 2.5 issues a year, which would be about, let's say somewhere in the ballpark, about 60 comic book pages a year. That's my fastest. My goal, my dream, having a day job, was to be able to put out one 24-page comic book per quarter. That was my dream. And if I ever did have my writing process dialed in, and I always had something ready to go, and I was very efficient with my time, I think that's possible.
I mean, that's impressive, because that would be like a page every 48 hours. Almost, right? Like 2.5 days?
Something like that. I mean, actually, that's pretty. Yeah, and the thing about it is, when I'm inking, I can get a page done that quick. And the thing is, I don't do full pencils. I ink over my layouts because I'm inking myself, and it doesn't get any neater if I do tighter. First off, the tighter I pencil, the worse it looks. I'm one of those guys who I'm always trying to get more energy and spontaneity into my work. If the longer I work on something, the stiffer it gets, the worse it looks. So I've got to try and keep that spontaneity. And so then the problem is finding that balance between spontaneity and something that looks like I crapped it out. But to tie it into the writing process is that I knew that I should be writing every day, but I thought I want to get this last issue done. And the last issue was a 40-page issue. So, as opposed to 24 pages. So instead of writing while I was finishing up the last issue, I just put all of my energy into finishing that last issue. And then when I was done, I put all of my energy into... Well, first off, I did kind of like relax and just say, I'm just going to enjoy figure drawing classes and doing drawing stuff, because my brain really did need a break after such a Herculean feat.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started putting together all the back matter and putting together the trade. And then eventually, I think a year after that, I got the trade out sometime in 2020. But then I said, all right. And even then, I kind of gave myself a little bit of breathing space. Like, you know what? You've earned yourself a reward. I signed up for schoolism. I took some classes and, learned some new skills, worked on some color painting and, taking some, just different things to stimulate the brain. Now, in this period, that's when I started getting back into the writing. But I did not adhere to the whole writing everyday schedule. And what eventually happened was I got to the point where I think you guys know how anytime you finish anything, doesn't have to be a big project, but whenever you finish anything, you might feel super excited about it. And then you either do one of two things. You either hate it immediately, and then somewhere down the line you look back like, it wasn't that bad. Or you finish, you're like, yay! And then like a month later, you're like, this is crap, burn it all. And so with the new book that I've been working on, my premise, my strength is high concept. A guy who's cursed with remote viewing. Lucifer's story, retold as a Western. I'm great with high concept pitch lines, and I'm great with plot. Like if they asked me to write Twister 3, I'm your guy. I can come up with like high concept stuff. I'm great with like the plot points. The character development is sort of my weakness. Like the same way that we've got like certain anatomical or drawing weaknesses, I know that the emotional development, really making the interiority of a character resonate with readers, that is probably my weakest ability. And so I said, I really just, it's one of those things where I'm like, I want the people to care about the characters.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry, Jeremy. I mean, I was just gonna say I put myself in that same camp, and for me, with Young and the Dead, I wasn't. I guess I wasn't as concerned about it because it's kind of a throwback to like Goonies and stuff, and I love Goonies, but like the character, I mean, they're not like they're what they are. They're kind of tropes, and they're just not these really deep characters. So I never really worried if they didn't come across that way. But with the next one, kind of like you're talking about, I don't know. I wanted to take it a step further. So yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because I relate on the opposite end, where I feel like all of my work so far has really relied heavily on characters that are so real. Like part one of them's autobiographical, so it's like you have to kind of do that. But then the other, I've had people who thought it was autobiographical, and there's parts of it that are, but not as much as people might think for Jacob's Apartment. And then for that story, like it's so character driven that it's like, I would have kind of the opposite issue of like kind of like, to me, like coming up with the broader arc is harder than kind of building out characters. So it's funny because it's like I relate to that, but almost like on the opposite end, where it's like the stuff that's harder for me is the bigger, broader kind of plot stuff. Mm-hmm. And then when it comes to like the nitty gritty of characters and stuff, I'm like, oh, I can dive in because like that's kind of one of my strengths as a writer. So it's interesting to me to hear that because I similarly have the opposite, with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, see. Well, that's the thing. To a certain point, it's come up like perfectionism is an ongoing theme on my live stream because I thumbnail things to death and I rework things. It's like I'm always trying to say, can this be better in some way? And I realize, Corey, you've actually been extremely helpful in me breaking out of that because of just the fact that you're writing a novel live. And you're podcasting and sharing the audiobook reading of the book as you're doing it, and you're just putting it out there, developing it. And yeah, you're probably going to rewrite things or edit and change stuff around when you get done with it, but you're just putting the process in there. And one of the things I've been trying to do over the past couple of months to shake myself out of my perfectionism is look at my writing process, which really it starts with like just a big, like a 5-point summary of like what happens in the story, like my inciting incidents, my complication, the crisis, climax and resolution. Like I keep it really simple to that. I just have I have like an outline that I do where it's just like 2 or 3 lines for each of those.
Yeah.
And for me, it was as simple as taking that structure and making a line sheet of paper with sections for each of those, with them, each section headed as a header, and printing those out instead of working on the computer, just sitting with pen and paper and sitting at the kitchen table or sitting out on the deck and just writing freehand, getting away from the computer.
Yeah.
But the idea, like Corey, where it was inspirational to me is I was just looked at the fact that what you're doing is you're doing a public vomit draft, and I said, that's the thing I need to do is I need to do a vomit draft of my comic. I need to get the whole thing out there so I can sit the whole 1,000-foot view of the comic out in front of me and say, okay, this is the whole story. It is imperfect.
Yeah.
But in this phase, before I go and start drawing actual pages, I can look and say, wait a minute, this plot point is unnecessary. This character's underdeveloped. This scene doesn't make sense. I haven't properly explained how this character gets from here to there. These characters don't care about each other the way they should. These characters I'm spending too much time with because they're entertaining to me, but they don't move the story forward. All those different things.
Yeah.
And that's where I am now, is trying to basically create tools to unscrew myself so that I can move this thing forward. But going back to the whole thing about writing a little bit every day, one of the things I've also thought is, one, because I still, I mentioned earlier that just life changes with work and family things, that my schedule's been completely disrupted on a regular basis, and I haven't been able to get into that rhythm. One of the other things I want to do is, once I get all of this next comic series written, is to then, while I'm drawing, like, fine, however long it takes me to draw it, if it takes me longer to draw it because I'm still writing every day, fine. I'm not going to push that anymore because I realize I need to do it every day.
Yeah.
The other thing is, now I want to have 2 writing projects going forward at any given time. One that is just whatever is the most recent idea that I had that's fun and interesting. So to always have something that's like a short, I could do it as a done-in-one, 24-page, 48-page one-shot. And just whatever it is, if it's just a silly idea, then it's a really condensed story. And I can eventually collect those in some sort of collected edition of short stories. And then and that way I can go back between that and the quote-unquote epic idea, whatever the next, 4-issue, 8-issue series is, because almost everything I've done started off as a 4-issue miniseries, because that's what Marvel used to do. And all of them have doubled in size. The series I'm planning to do now, it just kept expanding in size, and I kept trying to find ways to condense it, and it's all no. It doesn't want to be there. I think in graphic novels, unfortunately.
Yeah, me too.
I'm not as far along. I'm not as far along on my, my next project, but the goal is to make it shorter and more condensed, and we'll see, because much like Morning Star and the latest project. I mean, Young and the Dead was supposed to just be an 8-page story.
Wasn't that a mini comic initially?
It was a mini comic. So, yeah. So, and now it's 6 issues. So
that's the problem when you let, like, the fun part about writing, and I think Corey was kind of touching on this too, as opposed to drawing maybe. Well, no, it's not. It's about the same as drawing. Because, like, there's that moment when you're drawing, right, where, like, the first 10, 20 minutes at the art table, sometimes even the first hour, is just crappy. Like, sometimes. There's days, like, no matter how seasoned you are, where you're just hitting a brick wall for a little bit. But there's this beauty when the imagination unlocks and time just disappears and you're just in it. And it's beautiful. I think it's the thing we all probably fell in love with drawing as kids, right? Because you're doodling and you're trying to draw something and then you just get lost. And like in the best way. And with writing, that's one of the dangerous parts for me, and I think for Scott and you, Gerimi, too, and Corey right now is able to kind of be in that zone of like once you start writing for a bit and you get lost in that world and start seeing the possibilities, there is that moment. Like there's these moments where you're hitting a rough patch. Like honestly, people should listen to Artcasters from last week because Corey was literally talking about the story that he has up this week. And he was working it out, like working out the problem. And it was a little problematic, but it's like once he got in the zone, now he's able to get in that world and kind of build it out. The problem with that is sometimes that world just becomes massive, like, and so, yeah, I'm similar in the sense that I'll start with something that's like a scene in my head, and then it builds out into this whole thing. And I'm like, great, that's 150 pages or whatever, like it's never short stories. There's one thing I wanted to tack on, and then I don't want to hog all the time, but yesterday, so I've been doing these albums, and I've managed to put out 2 albums in like a month, and which is funny because the last time I put out an album was like prior to that was like 3 or 4 years ago, and then the time before that was like a decade, right? But I want to do music and I want to write music. It's an important thing for me, and I think for my mental health and for creativity, because it's an outlet I like doing. And what I realized about music is I need to treat music just like I treat exercise or art, where hell or high water, every day I need to spend 15 minutes just recording anything. And it can be like a bass line or a track or whatever. And I had, so the other day I had my sister-in-law do a Japanese track on a song about kaiju, because the whole album's just going to be every month, like every monster that I want to do a song about, at least 10, right? And I remember recording my sister-in-law, and then she had a couple days where she couldn't record, and I was like, okay, I'm going to move forward with the song, right? And she was like, oh, I didn't know you were on a deadline. And I was like, no. Like, here's my problem, and it's my own problem. If I don't do this every day and get closer to finished, then I will never do it. Like, it's either I do it today and commit, or I'm never going to be making music or songs, and I'll be another person out there who's just talking about making songs. And that's something I've come to the realization of, is I need to treat it like a spiritual thing where I show up and I am dedicated to this thing as if it is my day job for at least 15 minutes a day. And when you do that, you end up with, like, it's bizarre, but like if you're a musician and you record 15 minutes a day, you'll have like a 10-song album in 2 weeks. It's crazy how that happens. And I think that's going to happen with writing and stuff if you really commit to it and get out of your way. Don't be a perfectionist. Improvise with it. Like, do the yes end, because that's what I've been doing, and it works. It works really well. So with music, and it's been enlightening to me to see that you can make time for other creative journeys, but it's just a matter of, like, you got to treat it as if it's as dire as like showing up for exercise or whatever. It's just like a non-negotiable, like, no matter. Anyhow, sorry. So I relate a lot to what you're talking about.
No, I think that's absolutely true. And I think that's one of the things that, the earlier very rigid schedule that I had in terms of work, life, exercise, creativity, balance.
Yeah.
Everything was structured in such a way that it was like, okay, things are really, I can always, move the ball forward just a little bit every day. And I think that over the past really, 6 months, even prior to when I left my day job, I've been going through a period of upheaval in terms of just trying to figure out what my new normal is, what my new routine is. There's stuff. There's stuff as simple as the fact of, like, finding out that I had sleep apnea and having to get a CPAP machine because I like stopped breathing at night.
Yeah.
There's stuff like
I'm in the
like,
same boat.
stuff like that, and like I've trying to switch, prioritizing. I think for all creative people go through sleep deficits at some point.
Oh yeah.
And particularly,
and I feel like seasonally we do too.
It's like that's prioritizing sleep in a way that I haven't had before. Prioritizing exercise in a way that I haven't had before. Prioritizing, my relationship in a way that I haven't before, and just saying, okay, all of that, like that time that was like spent doing artwork, and I'm like, she's patient. Lets me go do the thing because she loves me. I realize there's places where I'm saying, you just see that thing of like everything is a plant, and if you don't water it, it dies.
Yes.
And I've been not forced, but I've been taking a real strong assessment of making sure I'm watering the things in my life that I had been in an enviable position of given the space to pour a lot of water into making comics and artwork.
Yeah.
And now I'm like, all right, it's time to spread some of that water around in other places in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I've spread some of that water around. And now that I've seen the fruits come up from spreading that water around, now it's like, all right, so maybe we need to build a drip irrigation system for comics.
Yep.
That's what it is. It still needs water, but I'm trying to develop a new way of watering comics.
Yeah, that's hard to find, and it's hard when you don't have because I similarly had a bit of time where that was a bit of a struggle coming from the day job as well, because I had, similar to you, Gerimi, I had been an art director for a decade, and so that was at least, I mean, it was, like any creative job, every once in a while you're going to pull a long day, because there's a crazy deadline. But in general, I was able to get it to the point where I had a consistent schedule. I had a window of time every day where I'd be able to work, and then and going from that to the chaos that is kind of freelance and like a schedule that's kind of all over the place, to find that window, and then also to find how to divvy that out or relearn the self-discipline stuff from a different angle. Because when you get in this, like, I think all of us have to have like a weird self-discipline routine, but when you get in that routine of self-discipline where it's like, here's my schedule, right? It's set for me, and I have this 4-hour window or this 5-hour window or 6-hour window where I can work, right? And within that, I can delegate these times to this thing. And then when you take that and kind of put it in a blender, it can really be a challenge to kind of find a new norm. And that's where I've been surprised by just, again, like finding a routine, but it also kind of rolling with the chaos of it has been something I've been getting more comfortable with. But also, one of the main things is just there's non-negotiables. Mm-hmm. And it's tough with life, because you mentioned some non-negotiables there, right? Like time with the girlfriend, or for me, like time with my kid, that kind of stuff, or with my wife. Like those are non-negotiables. Exercise is a non-negotiable, because we get to an age where it's just like, dude, you either do that or you're gonna die quicker. Like we're not like young lads anymore. But yeah, like finding ways to sneak it in where it doesn't corrupt everything, right? Because obviously it shouldn't corrupt everything else. Like we all need to eat and take care of that stuff. It is a weird negotiation. But I think some of it does come down to, like, you just kind of have to do it, and make it precious and sacred for whatever time it's going to be. And I'm rambling here, but it's like, maybe it's instead of like on a 9 to 5 schedule, unless you build that into like the freelance routine. I would say like it can also just be a flexible time period, where it's like I have an hour every day that I have to dedicate to this comic project or this writing project. That hour could be 3 a.m, or it can be, uh, you know, 12, or, noon, or it can be 3 a.m, or it could be 6 a.m if I woke up earlier. Like the point being, but that hour has to happen. Like that's the part that I think, for me has helped a little bit, is like, because the schedule is all over the place. But it's like, okay, I have to have this window every single day to carve at this thing. Um, yeah, it's chaos, and I haven't quite fully figured it out. But it is quite a weird adjustment at first, I think, with the, because you're right, Jeremy. When it's a schedule that's kind of delegated for you, it's easier to find, because it's kind of like a design problem where you have more limitations, and so in a weird way you have more freedom with the bigger limitations. I don't know if that makes sense, but
well, the thing about it is that you look at all of your available time that you have outside of the structure, and it's sort of like, oh, it comes down to the fact that I may only have 90 free minutes to do whatever I want during the day.
Exactly.
So that's the time that goes to that. Whereas when you have a whole day and a whole variety of obligations, it becomes a time management.
Oh yeah,
the time management challenge becomes that much more exponential, because now that 90 minutes is almost what you're trying to build the day around.
Yeah.
Now you're trying to build all of these other floating things around this 90 minutes that you're trying to protect.
Yeah.
So it is nutty, and it is again, this is stuff that for most people, the time management thing is kind of like the 101 when you first start a creative career. And I got flabby in my time management by not having to think about it, by having it on autopilot for so many years.
Yeah.
And the readjustment it's a level of discipline that people have congratulated me and told me like that, how disciplined I am for having finished a project that's many years long. And I appreciate the congratulations, but it was simply putting one foot in front of the other.
Yeah.
But when you now have a forest to navigate through, and you're not sure which path is the right path to get through, putting one foot in front of the other becomes a lot harder.
Oh yeah.
So.
Yeah, and when you've been doing the same, it's almost like you have to train for a new sport or something. Because it's like, if you're conditioning for boxing all the time, like eventually it's easier to self-discipline for it, because you're like, the sport, the game, like what muscles to work and stuff like that, right? Yeah. But then it's like, if you pause from boxing and now you have to train for like diving, you're like, wait, well, oh man, no, I don't know. Like it's a different thing. And to kind of retrain to be in a different area is a hard thing for sure. Yeah.
There was something I wanted to mention to Scott, that there's a buddy of mine, a comic creator, Carl Altstetter. He's done Hyperworks. He's done stuff for Image, for done tons of stuff. But anyway, he's a good buddy of mine, and he gave me one of the best pieces of advice that I've never taken.
Okay.
And he can say that of a lot of things, advice he's given me, of which I have not followed. And I always apologize later when I'm like, yeah, I really should have listened to you. But one of the most important things he told me when I was working on the final issue of Morningstar was, he said, do not lose your momentum.
Yes.
He said, you've built up a head of steam, getting this out. Now you're cranking out pages almost every other day. And he said, just roll right into your next project. And if I had been smart, I would have slowed down, properly built up everything so that the new project would be ready to go when I finished. And instead, I finished it, not starting the new project, then just kind of chilled out, then took a break, then got into a perfectionist rhythm. And so what I was going to say, Scott, is whatever you can do to get started as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, it's funny because my original plan was doing just what you did, kind of, because, comics, as much as I love them, I mean, they're a huge task. So I mean, it's just like, yeah, I'm going to take a break. But then somewhere I got this concept, and now I'm just champing at the bit to like at least start on it, at least start fleshing it out or whatever. But having said that, and this doesn't have to take you away from starting the new project, but I believe you do have to celebrate completion, whether it's taking yourself out to dinner or whatever it is. You have to recognize what you created, and because and that's something that I have a hard time doing, because I'm just like, okay, on to the next thing. And I a lot of times I don't stop and just appreciate myself and like, wow.
Yeah.
I mean, how many people do this and look at it and like, wow, I made this thing, you know? So.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't want to forget to celebrate, you know, the win, but it is a fine balance, right? Where it's like for me, that's completely been true, where part of why it was easy for me to adjust to this graphic novel was I had the pitch packet floating out for this, along with like 2 other projects, while I was completing Jacob's Apartment, which was floating out there being pitched around while I was completing 2 stories. And then like this triple header kind of happened. So it's just jump into the next project when the previous one's done. But like what Scott was saying, when I finished my first graphic novel, I didn't pause to like kind of celebrate. My second one, I did pause for like a week to celebrate, and that was a nice thing. But it can become like a week can become a year, and this is my new kind of mantra with anything in art, like even music, where it's like one day of me coming home and being like, you did good. You can relax. You can just play a little bit. Maybe we do something a little different. It's like, if I allow that with my personality, that could become 4 years. Easy. It's tough. So finding that balance is hard, you know? And you can fool yourself into thinking you're working. That's the scary part as a creative, because you can be doing valuable things. Like a good example, instead of writing songs, I could just be practicing getting better on the neck of the guitar and maybe practicing technique. And with art, it's the same thing. You can get lost in the technique practice sometimes, where you're like, oh, well, I'm going to go to the mall and like draw from life. This is good because I need to work on my life drawing, or I need to, and these are all things that are valuable, but yeah, you got to get on the Yeah, I think your friend's advice about the momentum is huge, as well as Scott. So it's one of those weird things of like finding that balance.
They're mutually exclusive. I mean, yes. I think you can do both.
I agree.
All you have to do is, as far as what I'm talking about, is just recognize, and it's not a matter of, I'm not saying like take a big vacation or anything. And you know, and that's kind of, I mean, some people might disagree with Carl's advice, but you know, and there's probably no right or wrong, but I definitely see what he's saying, and that's kind of what I'm doing. So yeah.
That's exciting. I can't wait to see your next project. I'm excited about Young and the Dead, Scott, but the next project, it's going to be fun to see you be able to flex that other muscle.
It's so different, and it's so so me going back to things that I haven't really thought about in forever, refamiliarizing myself, and so and there's so many possibilities the way I could go about it, and I'm not exactly sure what I want it to be, because it's, you know, it's got a music angle. I'm not a musician, but in some ways I kind of want to maybe have something that goes along with it that is. So I don't know, you know, and that, I mean, I reached out to Sean Tiffany, and we'll get him on the show soon, but he kind of did the same thing that I'm thinking about, where he just kind of taught himself how to do music because of his comic had something to do. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know. We'll see. But I kind of made and I don't know if this is like a cardinal sin, but where you put out in the world what you're going to do, because a lot of people say if you do that, then that's almost like, in some ways, like you've created,
you've
like,
done it. You took away the energy. Yeah.
I think in some ways it could be the opposite, because it can kind of hold you accountable. Like people will be like, oh, what about this thing you said you were going to do? So I think it can kind of go both ways, but so I don't know, but I don't know, but I don't know. I'm excited. I don't know if I told you, and I want to know more about the project that you're starting out, but
yes,
I'm not sure if you're familiar with, because I've mentioned a couple times, but it's not exactly, I haven't. I haven't.
We can do a deep dish after.
Sure. And it's public. It's public, so I mean you can find it. I just don't mention a lot, but yeah. So, but I'm as far as your project, I assume it has
Greek
something to do with Greek mythology, right? Yeah.
I love that.
I've kept it close to the vest only because it's one of those kind of like high concept.
Yeah.
Like once you hear it, you're like, duh. Why hasn't anybody done that before?
Right. Yeah. I kind of feel the same about mine, but like I said, I just put it out there, so we'll see.
I feel like mythology is, especially rocking some Greek mythology, is kind of right up your alley of strengths.
And you've been doing that for a while. I mean,
like the Gorgon
and things, and
yeah. Well, I honestly, I feel like the Gorgons are. I don't think there are actually even any Gorgons in the story that I'm doing, but the imagery of the research that I've been doing in the background while building this story has infected just my idea generating brain. So when I'm just sitting and sketching in the sketchbook, like I'll just add, Greek mythology elements to whatever I'm sketching. So it might be like a normal figure drawing, but I'll turn to a Gorgon or a Minotaur or just whatever, just start adding fantasy elements to things that I would just be doodling or sketching, and it just comes out there. And I mean, Greek mythology is so rich with so many ideas and story elements that that's one of the traps that I definitely fell into was overwriting, because there is so much that it's like the premise when I tell you the premise. Later on, off camera, when I tell you the premise, it's so simple that the execution could be done in a number of ways. Like it's a Dracula type story where it's fundamentally something where you're like, oh my God, this could take a million different forms.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And whittling down what that form is and what is interesting to me and what's important to me is the hard work. And also the fact that, like I said, I want to really push my development of character. And so, a lot of people, who are writer artists will write what they want to draw. It's just like, I just want to have fun. I just want to be easy. I am stubbornly the opposite, and I always write things that challenge me.
Yeah.
I mean, horses. Just the fact I'm doing a Western alone.
Yep.
People hate drawing horses and cars. That's what people hate drawing.
Yep.
And so I mean, so basically, after I finish the Greek mythology story, I'm gonna have to do like a Formula One comic.
Yeah.
I felt the same about bicycles, and there's a lot of bicycles in my book. So
yeah, I feel like we need coliseums, bicycles, horses. I know on my next page after this, I get to draw a cattle drawn carriage,
a wagon
from
train,
the 1800s.
Oh,
because I guess they on long trips, if they were going uphill, like in Italy, they wouldn't be horse drawn. It would be like drawn by cattle. But I remember sketching that out and thinking, why do I do this to myself? Like, why do I do these things?
You didn't write it though.
Yeah, this one I didn't write, but this one has a lot of those weird challenges of like opera houses and stuff like that. Yeah. And I did collab on the script, like where I was like, "Yep, I'm signing off on this. We're pitching this to a publisher together." Yeah. So I dug my own grave by agreeing to. But I find that interesting. I don't know. I wonder how many of us like kind of do pick stuff that inevitably is. Like Scott was saying, like a bicycle or Gerimi, like a, just hard to draw, like challenging things or things maybe you haven't touched before, like different genres you haven't kind of delved into before. Why is that? Corey's been having a similar problem to what you're talking about, Gerimi, like where he has this big vision of this kind of wild world And I think a lot of the challenge Corey's dealing with right now is like picking the little short segments within that world. Correct me if I'm wrong, Corey. I'm kind of talking for you, but
Yeah, I mean, a lot of my challenges, the writing is fast, the research is like an infinite amount of rabbit holes that I could go down, right? And so like I'll start researching, you know, how the Greek philosophers felt about time, and then that'll, you know, daisy chain into a bunch of stuff, and so I think the biggest thing for me is I don't want to write a hard science fiction where like the science makes sense and it's correct and people could like test the theory and stuff, but I also want it to feel like that. Anyway, my trick, what I've been doing is I will start to explain some of the science, and then the narrator will mock anyone who's interested in that, and I don't finish it. So I don't know, but then it's my biggest issue is kind of, since this is kind of a vomit draft, like I don't know where it's going. I don't have any main characters. I have a rough idea of how it could end, but because I was trying to avoid like paralysis planning, where I just infinitely planned and never started. I have no plot. So so it's starting to develop, but it's a very different way of doing things. Normally I'm extremely organized. I know exactly where I'm going. I know all of the story beats that I'm hitting. I know everything that I'm doing before I get started. I mean, Jim Lujan and I, when we collaborated, he is a much more kind of by the seat of your pants fluid type of guy. And I'm like, we're going to do storyboards and we're going to do an animatic, you know, and we're all going to be on the same page. And now I feel like I am writing this book just by the seat of my pants, and I have no idea where I'm going. So it's different. It's different challenges all the time. But yeah, it's definitely a much more risky way of doing it than I've ever done as far as that. So I don't know.
It looks funner though. That's the thing. It looks like you're really having fun with it, and the spontaneity of it. Because I think I've only listened to 4 chapters, so I realized that you were jumping around. But didn't real like in terms of not having a main character. I kind of thought it was sort of a Game of Thronesy type thing where further on you might start touching back to some of the other characters. So maybe as I go further, that will. But if it doesn't, then it's like, hey, it just keeps spiraling out there.
I mean, it could very well be, you know, a Brandon Sanderson Game of Thrones situation where there's just a ton of characters and it's all character point of view. That's one option. The other option is more of like a World War Z, the book, not the movie, where there is an overall plot. I do have an idea of where it's going. I haven't chosen how I want to resolve it yet. I don't know if this is a comedy, a drama, or a tragedy. I haven't decided, you know, whether the world ends or whether everybody's saved or whatever. And I might just write all of that.
The world ending might be a comedy.
It has elements of all those things. So
it definitely has elements of all those things. So the seeds for many different types of endings are there. But yeah, I mean, there's some. So did you read it in order? Or are you like on chapter 4?
I think that I'm trying to remember, because I know that I listened to the very first one like right when you dropped it, and then I think with other ones it's one of those things where when a friend does something cool, you're always like, oh, I gotta listen to all of it, and then you listen to it, and then you're like, then life goes on, and you get caught up in yourself, and you're like, oh wait, there's more here, I need to get caught up, and then I'll listen to it 2 more, and I'll go out. So I think I jumped around. So are you up to like 9 now? Yeah,
I just hit 9.
Okay. Yeah, I think that I may have gone for like 1, and then like 2, 3, and 5. So I really do want to find time to go back and listen to all of them in order, get all caught up.
I had a concept. This book initially came from the idea of I wanted to write a book that was so divorced from time that you could read any chapter in any order. Except for the first chapter and the last chapter. And so it still kind of works with that with a couple of exceptions. There's a few things that you need to read them before the other thing, but yeah, anyway, I don't know what the hardest thing is. Other than I'm not a writer and I haven't ever really, you know what I mean? As far as I have no training. I've taken no classes. I have read several books and I enjoy talking about it. So this is my first like foray into really crafting like a long story. So it's
what's interesting is, and I know what you're talking about, Corey, but I mean, not having training or whatever, but I don't know, for a lot of people, I think it's just intuitive, and it could come from just reading or whatever, but there are people that want to be writers that struggle and study and do all that probably can't do what you're doing. So it's an interesting thing when you think certain things just come natural to people, I think, you know.
Well, and also I have a theory. So if you look at some of the best comic book writers, they are failed comic book illustrators.
Yep.
Right. And Nick Patero was just on Ink Pulp with Eric Canetti and Matteo Scalera and Sean Crystal.
I know the show. Love the show.
Yeah. Oh, it's great. And that was his thing, because he just wrote Axe Wielder John, and it's getting all this critical success and all this stuff. And he had realized, like, I mean, if you look at all the like the 4 or 5 like major like indie writers that also kind of do some DC and Marvel stuff, he's like they all tried and failed to be artists. And so his thing is, I actually think being an artist kind of just lends itself to also being a writer. And so I think the vulnerability, the authenticity, the like hyper focus on like detail of the acting of what you're doing, and like why you're crafting the composition the way that you're doing it, or holding people's hands the way that they're holding them, and their facial expressions, those types of things. Like, because a lot of what I'm finding as I'm writing, I am just describing a level of detail that I would draw, like, you know, except it also includes more than visuals. It includes, you know, what it feels like in the pit of your stomach when you're having that experience or whatever. But it's just, I have trained myself for the last 30 plus years to be okay with being publicly vulnerable. And I think writing is just an extension of being an artist. So in that aspect, it is really hard. It's just, I was already used to, like, here's my stuff, you know, you can tear it apart. I think it's easier to trash visuals because it's less of an investment in the audience than it is to trash writing. But it still feels like a similar level of vulnerability. I don't know if you guys get the same, but there's times where I'm like, because I'm not, my characters are not other people. My characters are just extensions of myself, versions of myself, that paths that I could have gone down had I made different choices, or if I didn't have a certain belief system, or if I did have a certain belief system, or if I took away one of the rules that I live by, or the way that I think about certain people. And then it's just me doing that. And so often I'm wondering, like, you know, that's a level of vulnerability, you know, I don't know, those types of things. And obviously it twists a little bit, but yeah, I don't know. It's interesting because you're also like, when you write villains and you write, you know, racist people, you write horrible people like doing different things and whatever.
No one thinks they're the villain.
They're the villain, right? And I don't want to be the villain, but like, I do kind of agree with Mother Teresa that, like, she said, like, inside of me is a Hitler, you know, if I were to like give into it, you know, if I were to like lean into it, like I could go down that path, you know, or whatever. So I don't know. It's weird. So it's hard to say that, like, everything that we express, like, I don't agree with that idea that everything that we express is like something that I hold, you know. It's like my characters will say and do things that I don't agree with and those types of things. But I think on a very human level, there's still like the emotionality, the logic, the illogic, the, you know, the reason, the, you know, the irrational is all very deeply human. And it's coming from my self-observations of how I kind of experience the world or whatever.
Well, I think that there's an interesting, I mean, the most invaluable tool that not just any writer, but any storyteller, visual or otherwise, needs is empathy.
Yep.
Yeah.
Because that to write a character that you completely whose worldview you would completely disagree with,
Yeah.
like in real life, it's simply a matter of really saying, well, what does this person want and why?
Yeah.
It's not about are they right or are they wrong. It's just
Right.
about who are they? Why do they believe what they believe?
Yeah.
Why do they want? And it's not about. And I don't look at it as like this way I can go, ha ha. This is why they're wrong about the world.
Right. Yeah.
You may get to the. I mean, I honestly, this is the thing. It's an unpopular sentiment, but I kind of think Thanos was right. You know, it goes back to that whole thing. Like people, when you see them at the convention shirt wearing the Thanos is right shirt, and I'm kind of like I look at the Avengers Endgame when they cut that hand off to take the gauntlet, and I'm just like, he kind of saved the universe, and they kind of undid it.
The thing that's the thing. Okay, there's a couple ways you can do villains, right? You can do like your force of nature villain, which the best example of that I can think of is No Country for Old Men. That is the best, in my opinion, that is the best version, at least in our modern era, of a force of nature villain. There is no reason, right? There is no like getting in his head and going, oh, I see why he's doing what he's doing. No, this is a force of nature murder machine, and it is advancing on the main character whether the character likes it or not. That's one way to go, but it's harder to do effectively. But the best villains in most cases, I think, aside from that movie, are the ones where when they explain, it makes sense. Like it's the Bond villain that's not so cartoony. Like when they do their talk explaining what they're doing, you're like, oh wow, that would work. Like that's the thing with Thanos that makes him so scary. Is there is a world where if you divorce yourself a little bit from your morality, it actually makes sense, and also in its own twisted way, kind of has its own logic and its own morality to it. And so that I think that's the scariest and best villains are the ones where their reason why is so good, even though it's bad. And I love what you said, Jeremy, because I'm teaching English this summer. Like I'm literally teaching an English class, and it's like one of the things that I've really been trying to harp with the English thing is when you're writing, it really is a question of curiosity, and this is where I think Corey's dead on too about the art and writing just going hand in hand so well. Because as an artist, when you're drawing a bicycle, right, it's hard until you start asking why. And the second you start asking why, then you're like, oh, the spokes hold to the wheel this way. And then like Corey's even drawn, like once you see the pattern of the spoke, right, it's not so intimidating to draw a bicycle because you're like, oh, I see the logic and the way this was manufactured. It's an exploration.
Like, why would you even draw the spokes?
Yeah.
Because
if you have to draw the spokes, or even if you have to cartoon the spokes, just seeing the direction that they're attached.
I will see the ones with the mag wheels, the bikes, because some of my bikes have mag wheels, those are a lot easier. But those spokes, I can look at a bike all day and I still do not understand the reasoning for those. Okay,
I'll tell you the reason, because the why is one of the most interesting things.
It really
is. If you have the hub of your wheel, and the spoke hits the center of that hub and goes straight out from the center, then if you had a direct impact to the edge of the tire, it transfers the energy of that directly to the hub, and it will bend the wheel because there's nowhere else that the energy goes. So in actuality, the spoke will always go from the edge to both sides, so that if it hits, the worst thing that happens is that the wheel rotates because the force rotates and turns the hub.
It's displacing.
That's why I'm not an engineer.
Yeah.
But what I guess I'm getting at is like when you're writing like a villain or writing characters, even characters polar opposite from you, the ability to look at somebody and say like because you're especially if it's plot driven, right? Where it's like, okay, I need this to happen in the plot. I need the villain to do this. then it's just a question of, well, why would a villain do this? Like, why would,
Right.
like, you know, if you have your hero, it's like, why would a villain pursue that hero? Like, why would, if you're writing Superman or something, it's like, why would somebody want to attack Superman? Right? Like, or why would they put Superman in a position where he needs to intervene? Like, what's their motivation? What's their thinking?
Well,
And
wait, but right there,
you know, yeah,
right there, Lex Luthor.
yeah,
Yes, Lex Luthor is an egomaniacal maniac, and he
Yeah.
doesn't want any. The real reason is he doesn't want anyone to save the world other than him. But he honestly does believe that he's an alien menace who's out to take over the Earth.
yep.
Simple as that.
And he,
Yeah,
and
at
he's-
his best,
he's a-
at his worst plot lines, he's just trying to make new real estate, which is a little hard to buy, you know? So it's like,
yeah.
yeah,
In the movies, he's not as believable, but in the comics,
Exactly.
he's one of the best U.S. presidents we've had.
yeah.
It's,
Yeah, I'm
Edie has
hoping-
a really good comment that I want to bring
Okay.
up here. Everybody's got a shadow because everybody has an image of themselves, and whatever doesn't fit that image goes into the shadow. But people are so complex that the shadow will always be gigantic, and that's the paradox. The shadow doesn't really exist. It's just parts of you that you don't use. It's not necessarily evil. It's just you. That was kind of interesting.
That's
Yeah.
great. Yeah, I love that. I was thinking, you know, talking about villains and everything. So if you read Young and the Dead, number 5, there's a cliffhanger and a villain is revealed who's behind the whole thing, and I'm hoping that his, you know, reasoning makes sense in a twisted way. So we'll have to see when I put it out if I pulled it off. I mean, part of me wants just kind of the insane kind of crazy villain, but there's a reasoning behind it. Whether it makes sense, we'll see, you know. But what the reception is about it, but yeah. So, but I'm trying to do the same thing myself. So
I love it though. I think that's the fun part of writing though, is like the being able to get lost and like I was saying, like that's what's freed me with music and with writing is because I have a similar thing to Gerimi where I'll get stuck in perfectionism traps. And that prevented me from doing comics for years because I had many years of just redrawing 4 pages, right? And part of what allowed me to just finally do comics was just getting over the perfectionism trap and being like, okay, I'm going to make these pages the best I can within a time frame, and then I'm going to finish, and I'm going to be a person who finishes. That's been helping me get over the hurdle that a lot of musicians have, where they're like, well, I'll get better and better, and then at some point I'll write an album. And then I know a lot of people my age who are still like, yeah, someday I'm going to do an album. And it's like, dude, I've done 2 albums and I'm on my 3rd in like 2 months. And I don't feel bad about the songs. Like, I don't feel like they're crapped out. Part of it is just yes ending. So it's like, you know, okay, this happens and then what? And then what? And I think a lot of that's with writing too, where you're like, well, why would they do that? Okay, and then what? Right? Like even with the villain, like, okay, this is their motivating factor, and then what? Like, and then it's like, okay, they have to be fought by a hero, and then what? Like, how do they do? Like, what's the weakness of the villain? Like, what's the weakness of the thinking? Like the logic, and it can build itself out. But it is funny that Corey mentions the other side of the coin. And Jeremy, you're having this issue too, I'm sure, with mythology, where while you're doing that process, what are your limitations so you don't end up in the research trap, right? Or the jam band trap of like, well, now we're just improvising. Well, I'm going to make a 50-minute song where I just play whatever. And it's like, that's not great for so what are your limitations within it that are kind of,
or in other words, why is jazz terrible?
Yeah, exactly.
What? No.
Well, not all jazz. If we're talking Miles Davis, man, there's structure and genius.
I should not have said anything. Everyone hates jazz. Sorry, go ahead, Jeremy.
Well, you know, I mean, I'm trying to think of who not Charlie Parker, but there's another.
Charlie Parker's a good example.
Charlie Parker's a good example, but there's Ornette Coleman.
Mm.
Ornette Coleman is one of those guys who, when you first hear it, you're like, well, this is just that noise bebop jazz that people say that they don't like. And then you listen, you're like, oh my God, this is like acid. It's taking me to another dimension.
Yes.
So that's my big recommendation for everybody is just check out a little bit of some Ornette Coleman. The Sounds of the is it Sounds of the Future or Sounds of Music to Come? I can't remember the name of that album.
I can never remember it either.
Yeah,
it's funny. Is it The Shape of? Because I feel like
The Shape of Music to Come, I think.
Yes, because The Refused did a punk album that's really experimental called The Shape of Punk to Come, and it's got the album design shouts out the Ornette Coleman, the Blue Note cover, which as a design nerd was like, yes. Yeah,
but that's an interesting, all of that still, it ties in exactly to what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Because whether it's punk or jazz, the idea of balancing spontaneity with a desire to elevate one's craft.
Yes.
Because perfectionism is a fruitless goal. But the idea of both wanting to simply be free and just express whatever is expressed in the moment, but at the same time to have such control of the craft that freedom is well executed.
Yeah,
and
structured.
Both at the same time literally is trying to cognitively move your brain. It's trying to move the mind, body, and spirit in multiple directions at once. And I think that maybe it's something where, as opposed to thinking of, I'm trying to unify everything into moving in the same direction, what I'm trying to do to get super woo-woo is that I'm trying to take all of my creative senses and my life experience and my emotion and what I know about art and knowledge. And what I'm trying to do is everything is moving in the same direction in terms of I want to exhale and everything is moving outward. And I want to inhale and bring everything inward. And then exhale and move everything outward. And repeat that process. And I think that for such a long time, I've been in sort of that all or nothing mode where it's like just work, make, or just consume.
Yeah.
And I think that I need to get myself into a rhythm. Like in a perfect world, here's the thing. I've tried and failed to design the new comic to be a series of again, not too different from what Corey's doing, where other than the first issue and the last issue, to really have them be standalone, almost like Usagi Yojimbo comics. Yeah. Where, because I recently read through, I think it was like the second omnibus, because I bought it from Stan Sakai at a WonderCon a few years ago, and he drew a little Usagi in the inside, but he was sold out of volume 1 of his big phone book one. So I just got volume 2 because I'm just like, I don't care. I just want to get something. Well, my wife and I are both animal lovers, so I tried to buy comics that I think she'll like.
Yeah.
So I got that, and I was just so amazed at how you'd read it, and there'd be like 1, 2, 3, 4 standalone stories, and then you get to a 5th story, and then you realize, there's a subtle. It's like
the Andor thing. Like there's a thread underlying it. So at first it kind of feels like different snapshots, and then suddenly it all kind of culminates together. You're like, whoa, how'd they do that? Yeah.
Because it's like, Chris Claremont had that whole thing of how we'd have an A story going, a B story going, a C story going, and a D story. And then by the time the A one wraps up, the B story is moved into the A slot.
Yeah.
But what was interesting with Usagi Yojimbo is that he does it on a much more subtle level.
Yeah.
Where you really can read a lot of the stories as just standalone stories.
Yes.
And there's only tiny little bits that every like 5th or 6th story will culminate in like a 2-part story. Mm-hmm. And I realized, it just gives you that much more of an appreciation of how good he is at it.
Oh, yeah.
And I need to give myself the freedom to do that poorly.
Yeah.
And that is the challenge of having completed long-term projects. People will look at someone who's made a thing or multiple things and say, you know how to do this. Give me the knowledge. You figured this out. You're a professional. I'm like, first off, I've never made a monthly comic book in my life.
Yeah.
Secondly, everything I look at, all I see are the flaws. Thirdly, trying to do it better, that's one of the things that got me stuck in the perfectionism, is just looking at it and saying, all right, I'm trying to do it better. What I need to do is give myself the grace to try to do something lofty poorly.
Yes. And the other thing is, remember that no one, like the illusion that any of us have any idea of what we're doing is so compelling to people, but a lot of it is just kind of showing up to the gym and doing the reps. Like, it's not and here's the other thing that that I have to remember too, and I think we all do, but like for me it's also that the muse only visits you when you show up daily. It'll visit you every once in a while otherwise, and you'll have these spurts of inspiration. But like I said, like the thing about just kind of committing to the time in that world and allowing yourself, like an improviser, you're going to tell some crap jokes, but allowing yourself that process is going to allow the creativity to flow and the muse to flow. And I've seen Corey doing this in real time with his book, which I think is amazing. I love that literally the chapter that's up right now, which is great, was a brick wall for him last week. And I love that.
Well, in talking to you guys about it, I actually came up with the ending while I was describing my notes.
I love
like
that.
I was like, oh yeah, that's how it works. I wanna read this because I feel like we are doing ourselves a disservice. So where'd it go? It's right here. Okay. Oh, come on, showing the wrong one. Hold on. Let me see if I do this. Okay. So this is yeah. Well, that's kind of what this is about. So this is Erasmus from 1509. The less talent they have, the more pride, vanity, and arrogance they have. All these fools, however, find other fools who applaud them. Right? Charles Bukowski. The problem with the world is that the intelligent people are full of doubt, so the stupid people are full of confidence. And I don't know, like this is basically just describing Dunning-Kruger, right? The less you know about something, the more confident you are in that thing. Yeah. The more you know about something, the less confident you are in that thing because you actually know more, and so you know all the different things that are wrong and all the whatever, right? And so you move on from the beginning of Dunning-Kruger, moves into imposter syndrome. On the tail end of imposter syndrome is mastery. So I actually think the more aware you are of your faults, your failings, your foibles, your stumbles, the better off you are because the further towards mastery you are. So I don't want anybody to listen to this and be like, "Oh, these guys don't know what they're talking about," because we know enough about what we're talking about that we know what we're doing wrong, and we're actively trying to fix that. And as I teach some of these different classes, one of the things that I teach, because I have struggled for a long time with imposter syndrome, with toxic perfectionism, with a lot of those types of things that, like, to a debilitating degree of where I just don't make anything or whatever. And here's what I found. I don't actually think perfectionism is bad. I don't think imposter syndrome is bad. I think that those are very useful modes of thinking at certain stages of execution.
Yeah.
But they are incredibly detrimental to the early stages of ideation. And so during my throw spaghetti at the wall, trying to figure out what's working and, you know, what happens when I put these two characters in a room and all of the kind of experimentation of what's going on in the creative process of just, mixing materials and seeing what comes out of that. It is awful at that point in time to be like, but this, and have that inner critic kind of chirping in your mind. And so what I've found, and a lot of what I've read, is that you can thank that inner critic, but excuse it, right? Yeah. And so I can say, thank you, not right now, but later I'm gonna put you in the game. You know, like when I'm in the refinement stage, I am gonna be a freaking harsh. Like I am gonna tear this thing to shreds.
Yes.
Right, but not right now. And so that's where I think it's interesting to kind of do this, and that leads me to a question for Gerimi. I take a bit of warm up, right? I have kind of like a longer road than I would like to a flow state. So I'm curious if you're planning on doing like a 30 minutes a day. Mm-hmm. Is that 27 minutes of just like getting in there, or can you actually sit down and just be like, I'm writing now?
Mm-hmm. It depends on. It honestly depends on how long it's been since I've been writing, because the fact of the matter is, when I've had a couple of days where I have force myself to do it. Generally, if I'm starting cold,
Yeah.
then it's like I will sit there, I'll look at what I wrote most recently. So it may be just 5 minutes of looking around, figuring out what I actually want to accomplish, and then I'll sort of like, I'll write a couple of sentences, go look at some other stuff. Then I'll say, oh, wait, no, this is interesting. And then I'll write for maybe 10 minutes, and then I'll get to something that requires some research. And this is the critical moment. If I have some strength and self-resolve, I will put in brackets just the words research.
Yeah.
Right.
And then keep writing.
Yeah.
And because if I can push that off to the end of the 30 minutes, then it's one of those things where, okay, fine, I finished my work. I can go look up the thing that I want to look.
Smart.
But a lot of times I'll get there and I'll say, I need to know if this city in ancient Rome existed before the Mycenaean era or, later on in a historical age. Because my story takes place at a very specific period in Greek history. Not the specific area is a few hundred years, but there's a reason why I have it set up that way. And so I'm like, because there's things where I had certain battles that I was going to have in the story, and then I realized, oh wait, this takes place after my story.
Yeah. We had that. We actually had that with this book that I'm working on, where the magician in it, we really wanted him to be Houdini because he was like real close in the timeline. And then we looked at it, and he would have been like 12, and we're like, "Crap, we can't do that." Anyhow, so we ended up finding a different magician who mentored Houdini, to put in it. But it was an interesting conundrum where I think the original script it was Houdini, and then me and the author both decided to go with somebody more believable. But that is the problem when you set yourself in history. There are some limitations where you can't just move a war, Yeah.
Or move the fall of a particular civilization.
Oh yeah.
Or you set up a rule in your story where time doesn't matter, and then you can do whatever you want.
Darn it, Corey. That is now I'm seeing the real the method behind the madness.
The method is if I break one of the laws of physics, then who knows what works?
Yeah.
Or the story can take place when the person figure out how to break. Well, no, but you do play with that. Once time is unstuck, it's just a matter of if somebody was there to punch them back into place right when it happened. That might have been the only thing that could have stopped this from all unraveling. But it's got a very Vonnegut feel to it, which I'm very much enjoying.
I've actually been reading a lot of him recently.
Have you read Bluebeard yet? You got to read Bluebeard.
No,
it's his funniest thing, and it's very relevant. It's so funny. That's my favorite Vonnegut story.
Yeah, I'm in the middle of 4 books right now, so I'm trying.
You do that too?
Yeah,
It's the worst.
Anyway, I don't know. You described your 30 minutes like 5 minutes was a really long time. I will sit down to do stuff, and it's like, okay. And immediately I have 3 ideas of how I could optimize the layout of my studio, and then I'm like, I need to sharpen all of the pencils in this house right now. And those dishes have been sitting there for a day and a half, and that is unacceptable at this point. For some reason it needs, or whatever. So, anyway, it's funny.
Suddenly all the chores you never want to do are really prescient where you're like, wow, I could really do some laundry right now. I just would love to do that.
That's an interesting thing because I know that all of our brains will do that. And when it happens, I have to tell myself that is my brain freaking out at being forced to
resistance.
And it wants to get away from whatever I'm trying to make it do right now.
Exactly.
And go with any excuse, and I have to force myself. So I made it so absolutely it varies. There are times when I will sit down for 30 minutes and I will write fully for 30 minutes the whole time, keys pounding. But I would say that's probably only about 25% of the time. Then I would say about 50% of the time, it'll be maybe half the time writing, half the time I can't resist looking up research. Or it's like, I'll write for a little bit, read, go down a research rabbit hole for half of the time, and then I'll get down to like the last 5 minutes and say, oh wait, this is what I originally went to look up the research for. Let me come back and write that last little bit.
Yeah.
And then there's times when I sit down to write and I honestly maybe get 2 or 3 sentences done.
Yeah.
And then I'll end up looking at images of Greek ruins online, or maybe I'll say, you know what, the words aren't coming to me today, and I'll just sketch a character from a scene that I was supposed to be writing, and I'll just say, all right, the words aren't coming today. Let me just work in pictures, because and this is an interesting thing. Art, the act of drawing, visual picture making, is a therapeutic task for me. It's part of my mental health and self-care.
Yeah.
Writing is an essential part of my creativity, but it does not provide the comfort that art does. So sometimes there are times when I will force it and I will keep writing and push through. And then there's times when I'm sitting there and I keep pushing and I'm like, my brain is telling me that it needs comfort today. And I'm like, and I try to win the battle as many times as I can, and I try to be forgiving of myself on the days when I lose.
Yeah.
I love that. And I also like that you mentioned before too, that, you know, if you stay with it consistently though, that flow state happens. And I have found that too, where whatever the creative task, if it's music, if it's writing, if it's art, it's like, if you're constantly showing up, it is like doing your reps at the gym, where it's like, it doesn't hurt as much to hit those barbells or whatever, because you've been hitting them every day of the week or whatever, right? Or every other day. And so your muscles are ready for it. So like that, the longer you do the gym, the easier it is to get to the gym and get to your workout and not have like tons of prep beforehand or tons of like self-talk of like, you can do this. You just get there and do the work because you know you're there. I find that that's totally true, where if I get consistent with it and keep that flow state, it's like easier to get into the zone. When you sit down, you're conditioning yourself to, this is writing time, and the creative parts of your brain just start working, like firing. Every once in a while, you'll have one of those off days. Same with art, like with comics, you know, like Gerimi, like one of the things that's hard with the transition, right, is when you were living in that world of that comic for 5 years. So when you had that 20-minute window to work on it, you could like hit the ground running and get in that zone fast, because you lived in that world and you're showing up to it all the time. So getting in that state again is really, I don't know, hard and important, I think. Yeah.
Dylan brings up an interesting point. He said that's why some ancient Greeks believed that art was a form of madness or a form of divine madness. And it's interesting because if you look at the way that the Greeks, especially the Spartans, felt about kind of the muses or you know, being possessed, there is, with the genius, the jinn, the kind of, you know, forces that kind of inhabit those of us that choose to live our lives a specific way. The warrior in the battlefield that goes into a berserker rage is having a very similar experience to the poet that hits a flow state. Like in their mind, the level of like dedication and focus and preparation to be able to hit a flow state or a berserker rage was the same, but different disciplines. So, you know, different gods would have been involved, you know, in the possession or whatever of that type of situation. But it is interesting to think that, like, amongst all of the activities that we're talking about, the results are very much the same. Is there's the mental preparation, there's showing up, being prepared to be able to do this thing. There's the work that you do physically to get the muscle memory and that type of stuff. And whether you are writing or drawing anatomy or, you know, composing the shot or, you know, killing a bunch of people in a battle, like the idea of like being at a battle and getting distracted by your laundry, there's a level of focus that is very important when other people are trying to kill you. And so the way that the Greeks looked at the arts as a level of possession, of madness and intensity, and that the warrior life was also an art. Those types of things. It's kind of interesting.
Martial arts.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. It's not, martial work, it's interesting because the idea, I'm kind of working this out in my head out loud, but the idea of that is like Stephen Pressfield talks about, like he looked at creativity through the warrior mindset, as a Marine and as, Spartan hoplites and those types of things. And then you have, Big Magic, which looks at the same thing, but through more of like a feminine ideology. And then you've got Rick Rubin, who's looking at the same thing, but more of basically a hip hop hippie kind of view. And they're all talking about the same concept from different angles, that there are these ideas that want to be realized inside of time. They're beings outside of time. And if you are a willing receptor of those things and you show up ready to be bored enough to be receptive to them, then they will connect with you, whether that be writing or art or images or photography or painting or, comics. It's kind of an interesting thing.
Yeah, and I think that the interesting thing too is, like, much like martial arts, right? Where if this happens with live performances so obviously too. Like, if somebody's acting, like Corey, I'm sure your wife has seen this or maybe even experienced this. If you're an actor and you're in like live theater, the second you think too much about your line and you haven't done rehearsals enough to where it's just innate, you're going to screw up. Like, you can't overthink when you're on a stage, because when you overthink and you get perfectionistic, you psych yourself out and you fumble live, right? And that's the worst thing. So you have to rehearse enough. And the whole point of rehearsal is so that when you're in there, you can just flow with it. And it's just instinct. And you can hit that line, and you get comfortable enough to where even if you screw up, you can just flow with it, right?
Yeah, and to build off of that, there's the rehearsal, right? Which might be the muscle memory or the shorthand that we use for certain things.
Yeah.
But then there's also a lot of interesting stuff that I've seen her do, where she's doing the character work, right? She's trying to find the invisible ink. Brian McDonald talks about that in his storytelling books. She's trying to find the invisible ink of, like, what has this character experienced outside of the script that would cause them to go this way or do this thing, or what are they trying to accomplish in this scene? What do they want? So that when somebody flubs a line or skips ahead or something, you can run with it because you know how the character would react, because you know why they're there and what they're doing. Even though the script doesn't say she's trying to accomplish this, like, you figure out, like, why does Mother Superior have a problem with, this black lady coming in and kind of shaking things up in Sister Act or whatever. That was one of the ones that she recently played. She had an entire backstory that she worked out of the experiences that she had and why she joined the nunnery and did all that stuff, so that she could kind of have that improvisation as well as, like, the conviction of why she's saying certain lines and how she says them. So it's interesting to have that, both of those types of things, because it's interesting to have that with your storytelling, be it visual or written. Yeah. Of, like, this is what I'm doing. Here's the skeleton, but, like, I kind of know these characters. I kind of know the underlying message of, and of why we're saying this.
Yeah, and martial arts too. Like, you were talking about hoplites and stuff, and it's like martial arts too are about repeating, like, drills of certain moves, so that, like, you can have just like a snap instinct to just do it. Like, almost without thinking. Where it's like, you feel somebody saying, here, boom, chop, it's done, like, whatever the move is. And it's like, but also practicing self-restraint and self-control enough to be able to control that instinct and flow, like flow state. So it's, I don't know, I just find it really interesting and fascinating. And I almost wish, like, I do feel like the more we do it, right, the easier it is for us to get to access it. But I wish the more you practiced it, it was just like a rocket science that could just turn on and off. But it still can be elusive sometimes, to get there. Yeah.
I mean, I hear that, and then that leads me back to the AI of it all. Like, if there was just a magic button, so it'd always look dope.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds nice, but
it's not fun.
I feel like this, because I think that's the thing, because I've talked to because I have friends that are who I know are creative people, and they're very pro the AI tools, and it's not because they want to put artists out of business. It's because they're from the school of the writers who say, I hate writing, but I love having written. For them,
Right.
they really just enjoy the finished thing.
Yeah.
The act of making it is incredibly painful to them, and they look at AI as a godsend. They're like, oh my god, I don't have to go through the thousands of thumbnails and the thousands of drafts and all of the reference and all of the research. I can just describe what I want, revise it a few times, and get to. I mean, obviously, you have to revise it multiple. That's a whole other topic, but
Sure.
They talk about that, and I realize that the reason why I'm not on the same page with them, and this again comes back to empathy. I can understand why they believe what they believe and why they want what they want. But for me personally, the actual act of making is integral, if not more important than the final piece.
Yes.
Like, and I can't. Here's the thing: I can't turn to someone and tell them you're wrong for believing that the finished work is lesser. I mean, I can't tell them that they're wrong for believing that the finished work, if it looks good, has just as much value if a significant reduction in time was taken to create it, or if that process that I engage in is not in that work. I can't tell someone that, because beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Value is in the eye of the beholder. So if you value it and you feel that it is creative, then, I mean, to a certain degree, I'm like, okay, I see that you see that. But for me, it's just the imbuing of self in the art, the act of each mark that is made. I feel like the flow state is part of the work.
Yep.
Yeah. That's actually really well put.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me because, and I will try to refrain from going on an AI rant, even though Goldman Sachs just released a report that said that AI is a bubble.
Keep in mind,
bursting
past our 90 minutes. So
okay, well, I won't rant then. But it's interesting to me. I dislike the use of the word passion most of the time because it's misused. But in the way that you're describing this, I think it's appropriate because, like, the Greek root of passion is to suffer enough to bring you to action, right? Coupled with a strong, intense emotion. And so there is something in the sacrifice that is going into the creation of something that I think is important. And if you shortcut the sacrifice, you still might create something, but I don't actually think it's a creation, right?
Yeah.
It's different. It's different somehow, in a very important way, because deeply, I think we're looking for connection, right? We're looking for validation of ourselves. We're looking for validation of our community or our ideas. We're looking for gathering a tribe. We're looking for getting people to think, those types of things. And all of that is going to come from someone being willing to make the sacrifice to put themselves in a state where they can get into a flow state enough to be able to produce something of consequence. Whether that thing is funny or silly or serious or sad or whatever it is, the sacrifice that it takes to do that is important.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me too because I've been thinking about that a lot with the music stuff I've been doing, where I've been like, I've picked a really weird time to start making albums because technically I could just go online and just type the like lyrics and the genre and have AI make everything. And it's like, and it might even sound like more professional than the stuff I'm doing. But the reason I like doing these things is there's an unexplained thing of the expression of tracking the bass lines, the guitars, doubling the guitars, doing my own vocals, doing like the whole production of it with all the instruments and stuff. It's like there's something about that rawness and the expression of it and the work that goes behind it that when I'm completed with it, even though I'm like Jeremy, where a week later, I'm going to feel terrible about the thing I made. I do have that brief moment of like reaching the mountaintop and going, wow, I did this. Like I scaled this mountain, that I feel like the AI thing is missing that process. I think it's divorcing that process from both the viewer and from the reader. It's taking the soul out of it. Um, and yeah, and I do think there's something rewarding to doing that climb, that the whole process, rather than just again, like people can do what they want to do, but I
Look,
do
I
think
could, I
that's
could,
the thing.
I could have a helicopter drop me at the top, off at the
Yeah.
top of the mountain,
Yeah.
right? And I could take a picture,
Hmm.
and I could post that picture on social media. I could have all of the physical evidence of the end of that result, right? But it doesn't. I didn't get any better, experience anything. I think a lot of times people focus on with AI. I think a lot of times people focus on the experience of the consumer of that art, but there very few times do you have a conversation that we're having right now about the artist, right? I mean, let's say from a teaching standpoint, let's say that I was going to research a topic and give a lecture on a particular topic or something, and instead of going through the work of doing that, I just had ChatGPT write it for me. I could even also have one of those kind of deep fake models like deliver that lecture for me, and it might be written well enough to where the audience gets something out of it and has some sort of experience. But I shortcutted it for myself. I didn't gain anything from doing that. I wasn't changed. I wasn't transformed. Nothing happened to me internally. I didn't gain any of the benefit of that. I might gain some notoriety and some results and some, laurels and all the stuff that doesn't really matter. But I myself, I lack the experience of climbing that mountain or researching that lecture or really diving deep into the subject and trying to come up with some unique takes on those types of things. And so that's the same thing is I can spit out 1,000 illustrations a day, or even have it make video stuff or whatever. But like, why? Like that's not the point of making this stuff. It's like,
Yeah.
I want a transformative experience.
Also, when it's personal projects, why would you cost yourself like that? Like, I don't know if that makes sense, but the whole point of this thing is personal expression. I mean, money's nice and stuff like that, but it's like this is actually supposed to be like that art with the capital A kind of stuff. As much as even those of us who do like lowly cartooning, like I think most of us do try to make art. Like we're trying to make something
Sure.
of value and beauty or expressing something about something. And yeah, costing that, it's almost like taking the plastic surgery route to trying to gain muscle rather than gaining muscle. Yeah, you're going to get the look possibly. Maybe it'll even look better than action, but it's just not healthy.
Well,
and
I mean,
not
look
as,
at
good
like
for your soul,
let's look at an education. Like if I were to offer, and let's say it was accredited and everything, and say you can spend 4 to 6 years of your life in the prime of your life studying hard, working hard. You're gonna have people tell you that you suck at things. You're gonna have to get better at it. You're gonna do things that you don't want to do. You're gonna, mean professors critiquing your work and all that type of stuff. And at the end of that, you're gonna get a piece of paper that says that you did that. Or you can give me $40,000 and I will give you a piece of paper that says that you did that. And at the end of that, both people end up with a piece of paper that says that they did that. That's the one thing about students that many of them don't understand. That piece of paper is absolutely worthless.
Yes.
What you have become in that process, whether you did that in the classroom or on your own, what you have become in that process is the point. The paper just says that you were likely to have gone through a certain set of steps and jumped through a certain set of hoops.
Yeah.
But if you still can't do anything at the end because you're not transformed by it, then it's not a heuristic practice. Like the point of heuristic practices is that it's not a transaction. And so AI becomes very transactional in that it's input, immediate result. Like I'm not impressed by the rich guy that like buys whatever it is and then ends up at the end. It's like a big freaking deal. You paid for that, right? But I am very impressed by the person who fights and sweats and fails and falls down and gets up and tries again and then does it wrong and then figures out why they did it wrong and then makes it to the end. It's like that guy is impressive. And not because he made it to the end, because the rich guy also made it to the end, but because of the struggle, because of the sacrifice, because of the fight, because of the transformation, because of the heuristic nature of the journey.
Mm-hmm.
That's a really good analogy. So we probably need to wrap it up because I'm going to have to get going. But so let's if there's anything that somebody real quick wanted to tack on to anything before we close it out, other than us kind of letting people know where to find us and everything.
Sorry, somebody said the word AI, so I had
to. Well, it's uncharacteristic of me, but I'll end things on the downer note, which is that I think that the opinion that I think all of us share is the minority in the human population.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Most people are impressed by the fancy goods and houses and vehicles and properties that people can buy, and that they can just buy the trappings of fame. And most people are impressed by a person who can purchase the most while actually doing the least amount of work or having the most amount of transformative process. And by that rationale, the fervor in favor of AI tools makes complete sense to me. Because I honestly believe that not all, but a majority of humanity is not interested in a transformative experience. They're interested in the trappings of transformative experience, and they're interested in having the appearance of having a transformative experience. But they are not interested in the transformative experience itself. And the reason why this hits so many artists so painfully is because the nature of art is the transformative experience.
Yeah.
And, I mean, like when people talk about it, they say like, oh yeah, if you had asked, people if they wanted cars 100 years ago, they would have said, well, they just want faster horses. It's I can see people for whom a horseback ride in the country, across the countryside, and the smell of the grass and the sound of the trees waving by them and feeling the horse and even the sweat down your neck from the sun. People for whom they don't value those tactile experiences. For people who don't value the journey over the destination, which I think is most of humanity, that's what we're facing. And in a sad way, it's almost like I've sort of resigned myself to the fact that, whether it's a bubble that bursts and traditional art or digital art that is still drawn one stroke at a time comes back into dominance or not, or if it just ends up where art and all creative thought and effort goes the way of the dodo and we just turn into blobs from Wall-E floating in chairs sipping on Slurpees, I'm like, okay, humanity's going to have to decide for itself what it wants. I only have a limited number of years left on this planet, and I want to spend them engaged in something that's fulfilling to me personally. Mm-hmm. So I support artists that are fighting the good fight. And it's not that I think we should just roll over and give up and let AI take over. But by the same token, I look at, if humanity wants to burn itself down, they're going to burn itself down.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so beautifully said. And I've been saying this for a while. If we're attaching the value of our art and our our the value of what we're doing to just commerce, like the rest of society is doing with a lot of things, where it's like, well, this is valuable because it makes money, or it's valuable because of these like material things. We've lost it. We've lost to AI already. So I think the discussions and the thinking we need to be doing about art for ourselves and personal projects and stuff like that is like, what intrinsic value? We got to start talking about art with the capital A again, and not just get lost in the commercial bubble. Because in the commercial bubble, we're going to lose that argument. So we got to talk about value outside of commerce and monetary value for things that have value that's bigger than money, right? That's the kind of stuff we got to talk about, like beauty, art, meaning, transcendence. That kind of stuff is going to be, I think, hedging and holding our sanity for people like Gerimi and Scott and Corey and myself who value and love this thing. So yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay. And you asked if there was one last thing. Here's my one last thing based on what Jeremy was saying, because I agree with what Jeremy's saying, but I think there's hope. So, to Parkinson's law, this is from a talk called Leaders versus Managers, The Fatal Shift, talking about how the fall of every civilization is marked by a shift from excellence to mediocrity. To Parkinson's law, which shows how management gobbles up everything else, he added what he calls the law of ingelitance. Managers do not promote individuals whose competence might threaten their own, and so as the power of management spreads ever wider, the quality deteriorates if that is possible. In short, while management shuns equality, it feeds on mediocrity. On the other hand, leadership is an escape from mediocrity. All of the great deposits of art, science, and literature from the past on which all civilization is nourished comes from us from a mere handful of leaders, for the quality of leadership are all the same in all fields, a leader simply being the one who sets the highest example, and to do that in an open way to shed greater light and knowledge, the leader must break the mold. A ship in the port is safe, says Captain Hopper, speaking of management, but that is not what ships are built for, she adds, calling for leadership. And so while I agree with you that, yes, humanity tends to go for shortcuts and mediocrity by default, I think there will always be the leaders, the artists, the musicians that break the mold, and that is actually what nourishes society and keeps it flowing. And so I agree, but I wanted to add that little ray of hope that as long as there are those of us that are willing to fight against the mediocre and rebel against the tyranny of mediocrity, then society still exists. Without that, we'd evolve into just apes.
We'll definitely, that's good to end it on something that's a little less dire. So anyway,
I tried to nosedive it.
And you're all going to die. Okay, anyhow, let's...
Jeremy.
And we're all going to be batteries to feed the machine. Good night.
All right.
Where can everyone find you online?
Okay, so you can find me on YouTube, youtube.com/GERIMI. I live stream weekly, Sundays, 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. For everything else, you can find me at my website, gerimi.net. And from there, it's got links to my newsletter, which is the best way to keep track of me. You know, my store, my Amazon, Instagram, all the other stuff. Although, honestly, social media, that's a whole nother... We're not going to get into that. But anyway, yes, Gerimi.net.
I love it.
I knew we were going there, and I agree, but we'll leave it at that. Corey.
Yeah, you can find my stuff at CoreyKerr.com. And if you go to CoreyKerr.com/book, then you can read, listen to, or watch for free the book that I am serializing out loud as I write it right now. And there are 9 chapters. It'll take you about an hour and a half to listen to those, or you can probably read them faster. And if you want some of the most in-depth university level deep dives into the basic design principles that will help you compose better images without having to pay tuition, then go check those out on my YouTube channel.
Awesome.
All right, Josh.
So if you guys want to read a very compelling story about 2 roommates that are polar opposites that find themselves drawn together when both of them experience losing family members and a loved one in a relationship, find themselves drawn together in both dreams and reality, and what's like if you took Ghost World, put it in a blender with Eternal Sunshine for the Spotless Mind, pick up Jacob's Apartment. It's a indie graphic novel that's a doomed romance story. And if you want to pick up a book that is autobiographical, story that talks about faith and mental illness and tries to destigmatize hard conversations about said topics, that's hand-drawn, hand-lettered, hand-inked, handed to you by a human. Well, I don't know if a human will hand it to you, but regardless, pick that up. 2 stories. It's at bookstores everywhere. And then if you like indie rock or punk rock and you want to hear some new music, check out They Don't Care About the Born. And and Worst Places to Work, both 2 albums that are out right now. That's my stuff.
All right. As far as me, you can find my stuff at circworks.com, where you'll find my physical products, my digital products, my comic book Young and the Dead. I also have a YouTube channel. Well, this is my YouTube channel, so you're right here. But when you're done with this video, you can check out some of my other videos, all the retro Gen X recreations that I'm doing. Or if you want to go back a bit further, if you're interested in comics and learning about comics, check out Making Comics 101. It's the most comprehensive free course on comics you'll find anywhere. And in the show, the Artcasters, we do the show every single week. It rotates between the 3 of our channels. This week it's on my channel. Next week, I believe I don't remember.
Change my mind. Yeah.
But that
Josh.
proves my point, and that's why what I'm getting to is it can get a little confusing. So what you want to do is you want to join our mailing list. So, and I forgot to send that out again. But typically I don't. All right, but typically every week, about 30 minutes before we go live, we send out that newsletter just to let you know when we're going to go live, whose channel it's on, who the guest is going to be, and all that stuff. So there's a link in the description, as well as links to all of our presences online. And I want to thank the chat for just keeping it going and everything. We love you guys, and we will see you next week.
Bye.